Welcome to Full Throttle Talk, the podcast where horsepower meets conversation. From supercars to classic legends, high revving tech to motorsport mayhem, we cover it all. Straight from the driver's seat, whether you're a gearhead or racer or just love the thrill of the open road, you're in the right place. Buckle up, hit the gas, and let's go full throttle into today's episode. Welcome back to Full Throttle Talk. We've got a fantastic podcast for all of you guys today. And again, as always, welcome my wonderful co-hosts, Greg and Paul. Guys, we have a lot to cover today. So many cool things happened since our last show. But I want to start out by saying thank you for the great 5-star reviews you guys have been giving us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, wherever the heck else. And we're thrilled with the amount of you that are appreciating the fact that we are three true car enthusiasts, and we are not going to be co-opted by popular opinion. We're going to actually say what we think, and that's resonating with all of you. And we certainly appreciate all of your, all your attention. And Greg and I were just at a car show in Florida, MOTA, and Greg had someone come up and recognize him from the podcast, which is really great. So yeah, thank you for all your support so far. And make sure if you guys are on any of the, platforms, especially on YouTube, make sure you, of course, like and subscribe. So guys, lots to cover. What will be a highlight since our last call, something you absolutely positively need to share with all the listeners since our last podcast? I'll start with Paul.
Well, I was just having FOMO watching you and Greg at MOTA. I've never gone to Amelia Island and actually now MOTA's a new aspect of it. So I was so jealous that I just went out and drove, which is my fallback. Actually getting ready for the Hill Country Rally next week. My dad and I are driving 4,000 miles round trip, rallying to go drive to rally back. And so I think you saw some pictures on my Instagram, but basically took my green 911 sort of backdated. We were figuring out, I haven't washed it since 2019. That was the last time I washed my car. So it's sort of like thumbing everyone that just is such a diaper and wipe down and cleaning their cars. I'd just go the other direction. But anyway, did 300 miles, a little bit of rain, a lot of fog, but it was a beautiful drive. And any chance I have to get out and drive. And on Friday, I drove up to the mountains, Good Vibes Breakfast Club. So this weekend, I did almost 600 miles in vintage cars. I think on Friday, well, actually not vintage, but Friday I drove, my 996 GT3 up to the mountains, which is nice. Every time I drive it, I'm like, why don't more people have this?
So a thought, have you driven from Austin, Texas, where the Hill Country is basically, to California before? Have you ever done that drive before?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
This is the 7th time we're doing it.
Oh my. So you know that basically as soon as you're outside of Austin and you're in West Texas, there is nothing.
Well, just to give you an idea, when we're going out there after Quartzsite, which is just as you get over the Arizona-California border, we head up to Prescott, Arizona. From Quartzsite to Kerrville, which is near Austin, San Antonio area. It's the Hill Country. It's the only fun driving in Texas. We're on the freeway, the 10 freeway for less than 50 miles the entire way.
That's
so
good.
we took a 1,300 mile trip and turned it into 1,600 miles.
The best way, listeners and viewers, to find the best driving roads is go online and search for whatever the roads are that the motorcyclists like to go on the weekends, because those guys always know where the best roads are, and they don't want to share the best roads. But if you dig around, you'll find them. That's how I always find some of the coolest roads that no one else knows about. All right, your turn, Greg. What have you experienced? You and I had a lot of fun. By the way, MOTA Miami, Paul, not MOTA Amelia. That's happening later this month. So, Greg, yes, MOTA was just crazy. I saw you all over the place, and I want to start out by formally thanking you. One of my top goals from starting this with you guys was to finally get a media pass so I didn't have to pay for freaking admission to something. And my good friend Greg actually made my number one goal actually happen. And he met us and gave us, Julie and I, 2 media passes, and our daughter one as well. And we were able to go wherever we want. And I have to say, the experiences you have talking with people, even attendees, when you have media flapping around on your chest, is quite different than if you're just attending. It's so funny how many people want to actually, get to know you more, are extra friendly, and want to tell you their story. But Greg, anyway, so let's talk about MOTA.
Yeah, actually, I would like your opinions first before I give my opinions.
Okay.
So go at it. Tell me.
Oh, on what I liked about Miami.
Yeah.
Well, it was great, spending time with you. I mean, honestly, that's the first thing that pops to my mind. Getting to know you better. I'll say the second thing that really surprised me about, first of all, this Moda event was the second year that no, first year RM's done an auction there, or the second year?
Second year.
Okay, so the auction that RM did was pretty awesome. The room was a little noisy where the actual auction was happening. I mean, a whole flood of things. The positives first. Definitely the collector car market is crazy strong. I mean, the sales on the Friday night were 30 some $1 million. Now they're all really cool cars, and this is your wheelhouse, so I won't talk too much about it. But I was really thrilled and surprised to see how strong the collector car market was. I'll say some interesting things that I observed that I learned because of my media pass, because more people in the industry felt comfortable talking with me, I think. Um, I didn't realize how important it was, like again, I was talking to a lot of dealers, and a lot of these dealers were saying how they're moving away from the meat and potato cars for a whole bunch of different reasons. And I don't know what that is. It depends on their opinion as far as price point, right? And they're going to the really, really upper end price point. And like they're starting to transact in these multi-million dollar super rare cars, and they're making larger margins on those in shorter periods of time than they are the cars that say a GT3 RS or something like that. So I heard that a few times. I thought that was fascinating. Tells you really where the money's moving in that, ultra high-end collector car market. I'll say the Miami car scene was different than anything I've ever experienced before of any of the places that we've lived or places that we've traveled where we've done the car thing. I would say, honestly, the Miami car scene was closest to what we experienced in Monaco. In other words, a whole hell of a lot of flash, a whole heck of a lot of look at me, a whole heck of a lot of my Bentley and my Bugatti's better than yours. Um, the people driving Porsches and the more enthusiast cars were definitely more into, again, flash. They're all about the PTS colors and the fancy interiors. Whereas you're back in Southern California, where Julie and I spent a lot of time, and those people are like Paul. I mean, they're car enthusiasts. They're like, they get their hands dirty. Because Southern California's car culture stems from engineers, stems from the guys returning from World War II, and and it's just a completely different vibe than what I experienced in Miami. So, I mean, I could go on and on, but I don't want to, dominate your question. So your questions, your
Yeah,
answers, sir?
it was tremendous, and there's so much. I mean, don't take my word for it. Yes, I consult with RM Sotheby's. Take someone else's word for it. Go to Instagram, search for Moto Miami, and look at the comments, look at the pictures. Simon Kidston is one I would point you to because he's obviously a huge expert in the world. He flew over for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum sale, which is Thursday night. That was the $24 million low estimate across 9 cars, and they sold for $34 million. I mean, the Ford GT was like record price for Ford, $13 million. The Chevrolet, the Corvette SS was a record price. It was just unbelievable. The atmosphere was incredible. I mean, outside, under the lights, open bar, music going on, these cars, you're mingling around these cars. We have the auction. It's a world record price. Just that event alone blew my mind. To me, that was really, really amazing. Then Friday night was the auction, right? So Friday was the big parade. So the folks that are showing their cars could take their cars on a cruise. And if you watch some of the videos, it's amazing. They had like drones as they're going over, bridges. They had the Mercedes W196 on the road next to a Sterling Moss, 2-seat roadster, just incredible, just visually. And then, they had the Miami Vice cigarette boats out there. My mind was blown by how much little stuff was happening everywhere. They had these amazing Cuban bands with the brass playing. They had, a marching band, drum corps come up and play during the awards ceremony, and that blew everybody was running across the concourse field to check out what the heck's going on up there on the award stage. And that's, I don't know, it's just crazy. The food was great. Friday night, we had the auction. The auction, we had some no sales, but, I think some of it came down to a couple different things. That was a new room. That was a bigger room, which was good. But like you said, the acoustics were a little tougher. We had the the bar in the back, and it was like a party going on back there. I mean, there was a lot of stuff happening. And I've told this to a few people over the weekends. If you go to one of these auctions, just think about the dynamics in the room. And Paul knows this. Like, I'm in the room as a bid spotter, probably, I don't know, 20% of the people are there to buy cars, right? You got the sellers, you got the friends, you got the socials, you got the billionaires, you got the millionaires, you got brokers, you got dealers, you got all sorts of craziness happening in that room. I mean, the deals that are happening in an auction room while an auction is occurring is somewhat mind blowing. It's just crazy. I mean, Dana Meekum was there from Meekum. David Gooding was there from Gooding. Really fascinating thing. So Saturday was the big Moto Miami kickoff. And what a lot of people said, first off, you're not shoulder to shoulder. You have more room on that space than there's 3 fields, 3 greens. It's unbelievable. The cars are spectacular. Curated brought, I think it was 8 Countaches for the Countach class. We had best of show winners. Really, but Mercedes, first time ever. They were not, last year they brought a car to support us. This year they were a full-on sponsor. So they brought like 6 incredible cars. They had them lined up out there. I mean, it was just nuts. It was really nuts.
I'm curious, how does it compare to, because I've never been to any Concours kind of those gatherings except for Monterey and Scottsdale, which I know are different in their own way, but how do you kind of compare that? Because this was a standalone, one house, but all the events around it, right?
Yeah, great question. Because the way it is different is, I remember when they were talking about it, the president of Armed Sotheby's, Gord Duff, he said a great quote. He's like, I don't want to see judges walking around in blue blazers with khaki pants and a clipboard. Like, they wanted to be something different, right? And I was kidding, because like the next week I was judging at Cavallino. I'm like, do you mean like my outfit next weekend? You don't want to see that, So it's all peer judging. They want it to be a relaxed atmosphere. I mean, the gates don't open until 11 o'clock on Saturday. So instead of the owners running around at 5 o'clock in the morning and trying to get their car ready, that doesn't happen, and it's a 2-day concours. And I got mark my words, we're going to have more 2-day concours in the future, because the participants love the relaxed atmosphere. I had one of my clients, he was showing a car. He's like, I woke up at 7:30 the Sunday morning. I woke up at 7:30 in a panic. And then I didn't realize I didn't have to do anything until 11, and so they're hanging out by the pool, having a couple of mimosas or whatever.
To answer your question though, Paul, it's not like I was asking that same question to some other people that were attending, and I ran across some guys from the owner of GTO Engineering, and I'd love to have him on the podcast. He already said he would. He's the one that makes parts for Ferrari Classique. And I asked him, so they go to all the events and all over the world, and they said the only one that's better than Monterey, because Monterey Peninsula is still like, if you only can go to one and you don't want to fly overseas, it's definitely Monterey. I think Julie and I have been to all these things. But I can see Miami growing into something incredible. But their favorite was Goodwood. And so they said Goodwood is the mother of them all. And if you can only choose one per year, go to Goodwood. So that's going to be on my list of definitely things I'm going to try to do next year. Or maybe, I don't even know what month it's in. June? I don't know.
September. Well, Revival's in September, which is the one I want to go to, and which is the racing one. The June one I think is the hill climb. But and Greg, I like the idea of a 2-day concours, because I've done this so many times where I go to an event and you feel like you're rushing, and then you get home or your hotel and you're looking at social media and you're like, damn, where was that car? I didn't see that one, or I didn't see that person. And the fact that you can go back a second day and sort of drill down on the cars that you just glossed over. So, that's kind of genius. And late start. Awesome.
Yeah. The other thing that was really cool is they wanted the participants to feel super welcome, super appreciated. So if you showed your car, not only did you have a concierge phone number you could call at any time that's dedicated to you, the car specialist, myself included, we were assigned classes to manage. By that, like, do you need water? Helping them out however we can, which I thought was really brilliant, because as a car specialist, you want to meet new potential clients, but this is a very relaxed, non-threatening way. Like, I'm here to help you have a good day. And that was really cool. So each person had 2 people they could call if they had any sort of headache from the show field perspective. So
it's obvious that event is going to become something extraordinary. I think we can all agree, because Miami, the vibe in Miami, and frankly, the wealth in Miami, there are so many amazing cars that probably the owners didn't even know this thing was going on. So that's going to be one of those events that's already lightning in a bottle that going forward is probably going to be a must attend every year. I'm sure that's true. But yeah, it was great. And RM did a great job. Everyone was very cool. And the vibe was like you guys are describing, way more relaxed and less, let's just use the word pretentious. It was
Can I
chill.
get controversial?
Yeah, okay.
Well, not really. So I did come up with some complaints. So here,
Uh-oh.
so what I have to give a ton of credit to Rob Meyer for is he wants to know how can we make it better. So we already have an email going out. Give us a list of all the stuff that was a headache. And I know some people had trouble. It's a big machine, so some people had trouble understanding where that Biltmore is probably the most confusing building I've ever been in my life. I mean, I got there Wednesday. I was still confused on Sunday. I'm like turning around. Where am I supposed to go? But just little stuff like, we need some umbrellas on the show field so people have a little space in which to get away from the sun. I tried to pin Johnny Lieberman down on my interview for give me one thing wrong. And he just is like, he couldn't come up with it. Then he said, too much sun. That's what his complaint was. There was someone complained a little bit about the food Saturday night, but then I asked 5 other people. They loved it. So just minor things, we ran out of water bottle for our class, but we want to give people water bottle. Well, then other people realized, wait, there's free water over here. Why am I paying $6 for a bottle of water? And then they swiped it from the class. So just little stuff, we'll figure it out.
RM could have cleaned up on having really good swag because like that's Pebble does that really well.
Yeah.
That's something I know Julie and Zoe were looking for while we were there. There was
Basically, it was a baseball cap, I think.
well, but that's it though. So there's no like, when you go to some of these upper end experiences, they have these massively overpriced little, tchotchkes, key rings and scarves and vests and whatever else. That probably would have been fun for at least, a certain percent of the people attending. Shall we talk about cars? Wouldn't that be more fun? Let's
Yes.
move on. All right. So, as far as like really exceptional, we talked about experiences. What would be something as far as we're obviously going to drill down on really what the ultimate sports car is on today's podcast, but let's increase the energy here a bit. What happened in the last week in the automotive world that really is a standout? And I know I didn't give you guys this question ahead of time, so you're gonna have to really think. Really was a standout aha, because I have a few that are on top of my mind. Like what would be something, it doesn't have to be in the old car world, it can be in anything to do with automotive that really was something that everyone should be having on the top of their mind if they're car nerds.
I mean, yeah, the only thing I really saw, because I listened to a lot of podcasts and automotive news, and the fact that every manufacturer, especially the cars we love, Porsches and sports cars, BMWs, that ICE engines, internal combustion engines, are going to continue. Yes, the GT3s were going to still have those, but there was rumors of the Boxers and the Caymans, and really the entry point to getting in this hobby and experiencing these cars, which so many people I know, including my dad, who hated Porsches, his gateway drug was a test drive in a base Boxer in '97. I mean, arguably the lowest performance parameters of a modern day Porsche, and they were all going to be electric. And now it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. So I think there's just, from my car friends, especially associating this weekend, they talked a lot about it. It's not that they won, but like, hey, have your electric cars for daily commuters, but don't take our fun away.
Well, I mean, you said not that they won, and I know why you said that because you're trying to be nice, but the reality of it is the ICE people did win and the electric car people lost. Because look, no better proof of that is that Porsche was going to roll out their new hypercar and they decided not to because most assuredly it was all electric. So they just skipped this round of hypercars. And a lot of the logic, a lot of the thinking that went into electric cars just frankly didn't make sense. It just didn't. There's not enough anything to really support an electric car fleet. But so I'm going to go last. Greg, I'm sorry, Paul, did you have anything else on that?
No, that's it.
Okay, Greg? He's reading
So
headlines.
that was a curveball, but I did have something
know.
that kind of shocked me was McLaren announced a successor to the F1 and the P1 called the W1. Have you seen this thing yet?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Next. No. So it's like 1,000 pound-feet of torque. It's like 1,300 horsepower. It's a hybrid flat plane crank. I think it's a V8 twin turbo. I mean, it has 2/3 downforce compared to its weight. Like you could probably, hit the right miles per hour. You could do one of your Hot Wheels loop-to-loop things with this thing. So I think they brought back the triple seat arrangement, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, that's pretty significant, honestly.
Yeah, it is. So I'll give you guys my three. Number one, V10's back in Formula One. I think that's really exciting. We haven't seen V10 since the Michael Schumacher era. So the little motors they're running now, if I remember correctly, are 1.6 or 1.7 liter V6s with, electric hybrid, sort of that whole thing, KERS and all the rest of it. Well, so supposedly they're talking about bringing V10s back, which would be amazing. Number two, are you guys aware that Porsche had bought into a company that made synthetic fuel that completely,
Yep.
okay. So, synth fuel is kind of an amazing thing because it can be hauled in, ordinary tankers. It can use the existing gas pumps. It can use the existing infrastructure. It can support the existing fleet of cars that are out there. And with synthetic fuel, the harm to the environment is essentially nullified. So what's really fascinating is that synthetic fuel has never really had its day in the sun, even though it's existed. And people maybe, let's just say the green folks have tried to make it so that synthetic fuel never really had any runway to gather any momentum, and now it does. And one of the other things, going back to the V10 F1 thing, is the guy, I forget his name, the guy that's president of F1, he said that it would be V10s running on synthetic fuel. But it's very possible that we're going to see not we're going to see a continuation of the development of ICE engines, which I think is fantastic. And I think everyone listening does too. And because, the folks that are really sensitive about the environment are going to be able to rationalize, well, okay, that's fine. But, now we have synthetic fuel. So I think that's really exciting. And the other thing I thought was interesting is I was actually just listening to Spike's Car Radio prior to today's podcast. And Jerry Seinfeld was on there and he was talking about his 917. You guys know anything about that? 917, no sale at 25 million?
Yeah, what did he have to say? I'm very curious.
Yeah, I was curious too.
Okay, so I listened to him and I thought about what he was saying. So first of all, Mecum put it up for auction and they had agreed ahead of time, essentially, the car was worth $25 million. Right. And they were I think Jerry didn't come out and say it like this, but I think he meant this. They were doing price discovery at the auction with the minimum acceptable number being $25 million. And so what they were doing essentially is creating a market for the car, showing that the car had gotten bid up to this particular price, no sale. And then afterwards, there were some deals done and the car actually transferred. So we can only assume that it sold for at least $25 million. And if I remember correctly, he paid less than $5 million for that car.
I thought it was 2 million or something of that nature, but it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago he bought it.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. But still, so that's an interesting, I thought that was again, we're seeing lots and lots of, support to the idea that the collector car market is doing extremely well on these upper end markets. Who is that? Greg, the guy I was talking with from Canada, he also wants to be on the podcast.
Legendary. Yeah, Dave.
No, not Dave. It's something else. Super nice guy. The guy that owns Legendary Motorsports. He used to have
Peter.
a TV show. Peter, yes.
Yeah.
So Peter told me, again, it's the media pass. People open up. I'm like, a palm reader now. So he started telling me that Mecum's sale, he had brought, help me out here, Greg. I told you this story. He had brought, I think it was 40 cars to the.
Did we lose him?
Hello, 40 cars to.
We're on the edge of our seat.
The suspense.
The suspense.
So, Greg, was this a example with the 917 of chandelier bidding? Possibly.
I would assume so. Yeah.
Because I mean, my whole thing about that, and all my friends were talking about that with all the premier auction houses, and I know Mecum's big, but like all of us seem like wrong venue, wrong house. Like I pictured that Monterey, Gooding RM, Moda, Amelia Island, maybe even in Europe at one of those places, one of the, whatever the premier is of that. So there we go. And that wraps it up for today. Thanks.
Show got better. I was just asking Greg, because I was shocked with the 917.
why he chose that venue, that auction house. It seemed like there were other choices to be made.
He talked
And
about that.
I don't get that
okay,
either, unless other auction houses were approached and they said, I don't know. That's a mystery to me.
So
I wish I knew.
he didn't know Dana prior to the auction. He said he'd gotten to know Dana, and Dana, as Greg has pointed out to me, is definitely has one of the best car collections in the world. Is definitely a true car enthusiast. But I think it was exactly what Greg just said. I think that the other auction houses were questioning that $25 million number. And Dana approached Jerry with a plan that included that price discovery that I just described. That's kind of what I heard on Spike's podcast. And that kind of all makes sense. And it all worked out. A lot of times that's what auctions are doing. They're just finding out what the bottom line price is.
I will say RM does not want to take a car unless they feel it can sell. So they're probably just said, no, we're not going to do that. I don't know, but
and
they don't want
I
to
feel
put anything in the catalog that they don't think it has a realistic estimate and a realistic reserve if it has a reserve.
yeah. I'm the same way, even though we're just a microcosm of that. There's so much effort, that goes into these to put a risk out there of not selling it or hurting the car value. But I haven't looked at what the last 917, but weren't 917s selling previously? The most recent one, like in the teens, millions.
14, I think was the last one, the one in the Brumos collection.
And so I was thinking about it, like we were talking about that. Oh, it's going to be in the 20 to 30, 20 to 30 million. I thought, if you want one of these, I mean, like, there are other ones that are more significant, like the first overall win for Porsche, I think it was 1970, which isn't an attractive car. It's a red one. It's not the prettiest car. Or even if the Pink Pig, even though it did nothing, came up for sale, that would be desirable. But like out of that, I mean,
or the hippie in the
hippie, yeah. But
yeah.
this one was such a integral part of pop culture. I was shocked that it was a struggle to get to that. I mean, it sounds like it sold, but I was a struggle. That was a struggle to understand why that was hard for people to understand. That's the value of it.
Yeah, going
Yeah.
back to I guess, chandelier bidding a little bit, actually not really related to that, but I was in the auction room bid spotting, and we had an SF90 go across, and it was going low, and I had a dealer pop up. He's like, hey, can you throw in a bid for me so I can protect my inventory, basically? And I had a reserve. So no, it was no reserve. I take it back. It was no reserve. And so there was no chandelier bidding, right? Because they would have to buy the car. And it was one of those situations like, well, I'll buy it if it goes to that point. So when people are scared of like the no reserve process, you got to realize there's bidders that are going to buy it at a dealer wholesale price anyway. So, in my mind, if you think, all right, I'll just do a trade-in, well, then that's the same in my mind as like listing it as no reserve, is because it's not going to fall through the cracks. I mean, there's how many dealers and brokers and folks did you see in there, Tim? I mean, there was a ton, wasn't there?
A ton. Yeah. Well, so didn't finish my Peter story.
Oh yeah.
So of his 40 cars that he took to meet him, he sold 35. And I mean, that to me, I was blown away just by Paul is too. Imagine selling. I didn't get any extra details because there's other things going on from him, but I want to have him on the podcast. But then he told me a really amazing story to what Greg was just saying. Hopefully I'm getting my facts right, but he said last year in Monterey, he bought a Maserati, fancy this, that, and the other for over $8 million. Okay. He then had that car for less than a year and sold it and made a big profit on it. And then he told me about another car for over $8 million. I don't remember what it was. Same deal. So the dealers were, and this is what I asked him. I said, Peter, are you paying and sorry for talking about money. Sometimes it makes people a little queasy, but I said, are you paying the buyer commission on these deals? And he said, yes, I do. Oftentimes I'll pay the 10 or the 12% that's required on the buyer side to get the car. But he said, I look for cars that virtually have virtually no comps that I can then essentially, hoard for a short period of time and flip and make an enormous amount of money. He didn't say it like that, but that was what he was essentially saying. And that I didn't realize. I didn't realize that there was that kind of level of risk taking in that car world for those kinds of numbers. And yet there we go. So I thought that was really fascinating. And
it's a fascinating world. The whole auction thing is really fascinating.
It is totally fascinating. The stories are just hilarious.
And by the way, guys, just really quick, the most questions I got about our podcast from clients, friends, and just people on social media, was the chandelier bidding. I mean, more people were so curious about that. And I told them, I said, I was kind of the same camp they were until Greg explained it. And I have seen that before, to protect the value of the car. It's good for the car. It's good for the owner. It's good for the buyer. It's good for everyone.
If you don't want it protected, then don't do chandelier bidding.
Yeah.
I flipped my opinion, when I got into the auction world. But the people that are upset are the ones that want to get a deal, right? Or they want to steal a car. Not steal it, but get it for a really, really low price. Those are the people that are upset. And I don't blame them. Everybody wants to get a good deal, right? We'll go after the no reserve cars then.
But let's just be honest. It is a little bit sketch, as the kids would say, because you're making it appear like there's sales, the bids are happening and they're not. So that aspect of it is a little bit sketch. But
everybody knows it, I guess.
No, I mean, again, I don't want to put you in an awkward position because you work for, but a lot of Paul's friends didn't. I didn't until somebody told me. I didn't until I was, Jules and I were in an auction. We actually saw it happening, which was kind of funny. Well, I guess because they tried to deny it.
Yeah, you got to. I guess my opinion would be is if the car has a reserve, it's not going to sell below that reserve.
Yeah. And what also, yes, going back to what you said, Greg, people are looking for, the killer deal. And you can find them at an auction. But what people don't realize is it's not going to land in your lap. You have to do work. Like I have had friends go to a Barrett Jackson Scottsdale, which is just a carnival, and they will spend days researching all these cars, waiting for the one to come up that is underbid to buy it because they know it's all no reserve. And so they'll put in weeks of work ahead of time, looking at what the values are, and then just sitting there for days on end trying to wait for that car. And so, it happens, but it's hard to do, and you have to really know your cars. And imagine going and looking at them, because if I've won cars before, and then I go, oh crap, what did I miss? Like, why is no one else bidding on it?
But Paul, I'm sure lost money on cars. You do all consignment, so it's probably only on your
but cars. I do consignment, but the stuff I buy, I have a couple philosophies. One, obviously buy a good car. Two, my goal is to keep it for over 5 years. And three, I am not going to worry about what it sells for. And in the end, after it sells, I've had cars for, people are shocked, but most of my cars I've had for a long time and rarely sell them. I'm just better at buying what I know I will actually like and versus going through the gyrations of buying the wrong car. But in the end, it's, I keep them long enough that whatever I put into it, whatever it sells for is sort of a moot point. I don't care about that. But yeah, you're right. Consignment, going back to what Greg said earlier, I don't, if the seller and I don't agree on what the value is, it's no point taking it on. It's just too much work.
Well, the reason I bring this up at Moda, I was talking to a lot of dealers. As Greg knows, there were a lot of dealers there, and the great dealers were selling and they were buying. And the dealers I was talking to, some of them were losing money on some of these cars. I talked to a couple of them that, and they were, obviously it was not good to lose money, but they're unemotional about it. So you are like, just to assume that you're walking into an auction, even paying the buyer commission, you're not getting the better end of the bargain. In many ways you are. You brought up that SF90. I thought that SF90, but okay, that was actually my next question. And so I don't want to skip over it. But I think this is also something that's fascinating. At a lot of these auction houses, people don't realize that the buyer commission and the seller commission, the buyer pays over 10%, sometimes 12.5%. And the seller commission is listed at 10%. And most sellers, depending on the price of the point, let's just say the average commission is going to be 7%. So in auction, the auction house is making 20%. So you're thinking that's a crap ton of money. And I suppose on the surface it is, but then you factor in all the expenses that went into that. And especially when you look at the show that Moda was, makes me wonder if they actually lose money on some of those deals because it's so extraordinary. I imagine they don't, or they wouldn't do it. They're not dumb business people. But all right. So the next question I have for you guys is, what have you seen sell in the last week that you thought was really well? And Greg, I'm sorry I didn't prepare you for this one either. You're going to see him look at him. He's thinking, what did you see that was really well bought, and what did you see that was really well sold? And it doesn't matter. And like where you saw it, buy or selling, and it could be one of your own personal transactions. Well, what was really well bought and what was really well sold? Greg, I'll give you a break, and Paul, you're first.
Oh my gosh.
I'll go first. You guys are coming through. Bring a trailer. I can
You
tell.
guys go for yeah,
All
go
right,
first.
I'll tell you what I thought was really shockingly well sold. I'm sorry, well bought was that SF90, which was a Stradale. I looked at that car. It was Rosa Mola or something. It was, oh man, I don't remember the name of the color. It was essentially a Ferrari non-standard color that someone paid probably 25 or 30 grand extra for. It didn't have a lot of carbon fiber, but it was a really nice car, really clean. I thought that thing sold for smoking money, honestly. And those SF90s in general, there's no way those cars aren't undervalued right now. And yes, I'm talking about a car that's very expensive, but it's a, a beautiful 1,000 horsepower Ferrari that you can buy essentially a really nice one with virtually no miles for in the say the 300s to 400s. And I think the same is true right now for Ferrari 296 GTBs. So I would say anybody that's buying one of those cars right now, especially if tariffs kick in and jack the prices up on imported cars, which is going to happen. And Ferrari already said they're not going to be building cars in the United States. Can you imagine Ferrari building Ferraris in the United States? That'd be hilarious. In any event, I think those cars right now, buying those cars right now that's an incredibly astute. If you like Ferraris, don't buy them to make money, but either one of those is going to be a home run. Somebody asked me, because Julie and I are pondering if we're offered one, a VS version of, I can't say it in Italian, but it's the special version of the 296. And I was contemplating after I saw that SF90 Stradale sell for what it sold for. I bet you the 296 VS is going to be like 200 grand more than that SF90 sold for. And it's like, that just doesn't even make any remote sense. All right. So those would be my well bought. As far as well sold, I'll say what I've seen sell at the auction, I did not see a single thing that I thought everything at that auction that we went to was well sold. I don't think there are any exceptions. And there were some absolutely stunningly gorgeous cars that deserved all the money. So I could just pick one in particular. And then this is on Instagram. So if you guys want to really get your eyes full, make sure you go over to Instagram to Full Throttle Talk. We're all posting pictures and whatnot and videos. But there was a black 57 356 Speedster that was sitting, and it was the last day, Greg. I don't know if you remember this one. It was sitting next to a sea of Ferraris and 300 SLs and all these crazy, super expensive cars. And here was this little sort of homely black 356. And I thought that 356 unbelievably controlled the field. It was so beautiful, so perfect. So anyway, those are my bots and my solds. Greg or Paul, whichever one of you
I
guys.
do. Are you ready, Paul? Or you want me to go?
I'm ready if you want.
Yeah.
All right. So, well sold. And you're going to love this, Tim. It's Ferrari. It was a few days ago, and I saw it because number one, we just sold a 328 GTS. Number two, we're getting a 79 308 GTS shortly. So this was a 79 308 GTS from Magnum PI. So all the jokes you're going to get, they will land hard. Now, there were so many cars on Magnum PI, including Fieros, and it's not like. And what was the hero car? It was a little bit of a question and banter in the peanut gallery about how involved with this. It was early in the season, but it was a 93,000 mile. It looked like 2- to 3+ condition, being generous. It was a yellow car, repainted red, which is shocking. Yellow's so rare. Like, couldn't they get a red one for the production? I think the seller was a little bit defensive. I wouldn't say it was the best engagement, and it sold for 115. So you add the buyer's fee, you're at like $122,000 for a, and by the way, the banter on the license plate was hilarious. I mean, it says Robin won, and I tuned out then. So that one I thought was really well sold, because to give you an idea, the one we're supposed to get, and I know so little about Ferrari, is a one owner Southern California car. The guy's neurotic. It's gold with brown, and it's like 70,000 miles. I think it's probably a 75 to $80,000 car. And that's a one owner, like way better car. So I didn't think the Magnum PI part did it. Anyway, I thought that was really well sold. And the comments from the seller was basically, he was laughing all the way to the bank, unless, as we know, with Bring a Trailer and some of these other online auctions, the buyer may wake up and go, crap, what have I done? And unlike an in-person auction where they have your money, the sale isn't done yet. On the good value. And for the notes for today's topic, I might bring this car up again, is a 944 turbo, 89 944 turbo. It sold yesterday on Bring a Trailer.
When he says 944 turbo, can we just put like little heart emojis around his head every time he says
Yes.
944 turbo?
I know.
As long as we can do that for your Pontiac GTO.
We can do that for sure.
I will proselytize these cars because they are such good values. The ones to get are an 88 Turbo S or an 89 Turbo, which 89 Turbo is essentially the same car as 80. This one's guards red, 60,000 miles, clean title, clean. I think it was a clean car. Yeah, I had like a minor damage, but it was something stupid. Had the MO30 sport suspension, LSD, all the cool bits, and it sold for 25 grand. Like if that was an 89 911 Carrera, that would be 90 grand. If that was an 89 and a half 964 C4, that would be 105, 110 grand. And by the way, this car will outrun and do everything better and be comfortable. Air condition actually works. So I keep telling people, hey, I want to get in the vintage Porsche hobby. I really want an old 911. I'm like, but I don't want to spend a ton of money. I'm like, nope, this is the car, 89 944 turbo.
So along those lines, just to jump in here real quick, at the Moda Miami, there was a 968. Maybe you can help me out here, Greg. You know what I'm going to talk. Yeah, maybe bring that up with what you're about to say. Yeah, talk about that if you can think of it. But there was a 968 Turbo S there. There may have been even two. And there was, oh my gosh, there was I don't want to start, meandering, but there was a 993 GT. It's just a 993 GT. Did you guys know that before they called them GT2s, they just called them 993? Oh my God. It wasn't even the show. It was one of these dealers that just drove it. The white one. Yeah. Oh my God. I couldn't stop taking pictures and staring at that. It was so gorgeous. I'm such a Porsche file. It's almost embarrassing.
And by the way, the 968 Turbo S is one of my all-time favorite cars. There's one local where they make 10, 12 of them.
And there's 13. This one did not sell. You can buy it for $575,000. Which
I think my client bought, and it might have been it was at the Porsche auction in Atlanta. It was an orange one, and I want to say it was $700 or $800.
So if you know somebody, this actually qualifies as a private sale now where you can make some money. So let me know.
I would love it for myself. That is definitely one of my grail cars is a 968 Turbo S. Because everyone will ask you, is it a body kit?
Right.
Which I will respond, absolutely.
The Naka ducks in the hood, though, are so sexy. That car is so beautiful. Again, don't want to talk about Porsches forever, but those Porsches from that generation, when you see those sitting amongst modern cars, they stand tall, especially like the 928. People wax poetically, rightfully so, about 964s. But you look at some of those, the transaxle cars, they're so gorgeous, and they're so small, demure compared to this, modern, like a Tercel looks like a whale next to one. They're so perfect. Anyway.
Is it my turn?
It's your turn.
Okay. For my bought really well at the auction, we had a 1963 Shelby 289 Cobra. They hammered for under $500,000. Now you might think, well, that's insane. Why would a 289 Cobra ever hammer for under $500,000? The estimate was $500,000 to $600,000, which I thought was right on. The issue with this car is basically you bought a chassis number, but it is a real CSX chassis number 2000 series. And so the reason I say it's bought well is because you can buy a CSX 4000 series, which is the Shelby Registry authorized reproduction, for $400,000 to $425,000. I would much rather have a real chassis number. And I think that real chassis number should have been well over $100,000 more than a CSX 4000.
Okay, so you're going to have to explain what you just said. Now, I know the 4000s are the ones, the newer ones. And when did they start making those?
It's probably been 20 years now. It's been a long time. You can get fiberglass or you can get aluminum bodied.
Okay, so you're saying that the other one was a 427 Cobra. I don't understand what you were saying. Okay.
So the one at the auction was a 289 Cobra, but it had a real VIN. It was a real VIN car. So you can call it, yes, a rebuilt car, but it has a real Cobra VIN associated with it. Whereas the CSX 4000s are not, they're not from the period, I guess is the best way to put it.
I guess
This
I
VIN
see
is
what
from
you're saying.
1963. The other VINs are from 2000s.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that would
To me,
that
that's worth
does.
more than $100,000. To me, that car should have sold for 600 or something, and it sold for under 500, including all the fees.
We talked about that in a past podcast, whether they continuation cars that Jaguar did, and certainly Shelby did a whole bunch of times, whether those would be considered the same or whether they're tributes, or clones or copies. I don't think we came up with a resolution on that one. Maybe we can bring that one up again at a later time. Because I
Let's not
will
go down
say,
that rabbit trail now, but I did have an interesting conversation with a restoration shop where they have, I love this. They have a authorized Eleanor Shelby that's being modified. So take a fake movie car that's based on another fake movie car from 1972 that's based on probably a 6-cylinder fastback, but this third-party company made it official through their own, because they're the ones that built the Eleanor car. Now you have one of those official ones that's official fake one, but you're making it a modified thing. I'm like, my head hurts. All right, let me get to my other one. So my well bought could easily be seen as a well sold. So this is the 1987 BMW M3 enhanced and evolved by Redux. So this thing is wicked cool. The reason I said it's well bought is because it's an 87 M3 and it sold for over $300,000. Now, when you go into it, Redux, yeah, Paul's eyebrows just went like way up.
I mean, was this that one you showed on Instagram with the weird scoops on the side? And
No.
Okay.
No,
This one looks like your everyday. I think they're trying to be the Singer of BMWs, right? So this is the second of 30. And the reason it went, I think the estimate was 175 to 225. I said, there's no way this thing's going to sell. And it went over 300. It's all carbon fiber body panels. It's a souped up engine. It's a redone interior. And so to me, that's incredibly well sold until you read the bullet points. They had over 4,000 hours of labor and $567,000 in this resto mod. So I thought it was well sold. Reading the specifics, it seems to be very well bought, but still $300,000 for an 87 M3 is nuts in my books.
yes. Okay. It's funny. Paul brought up that lovely, what was it? That 325 I was filming you walking around and stoically talking about how you admired all the scoops and the blisters and what the hell was that? What was the aftermarket tuner for that?
It was Gambala. Was it Gambala?
Yeah, it was a
Yeah,
Gambala.
you talking about my Gambala guy?
Yeah,
see,
I mean, I could barely
he's
handle.
He's going to be sarcastic because I found that 928 that I talked about that would be my crush from the last podcast. And I saw it, and I'm sticking with my original premise that it would have been a good car to restore back to original. But that aside, until Greg showed me the 325, the 928 stood tall compared to the 325. And God bless the owner for bringing it. I don't want to, crap on anybody's, vision of their dream car, but it was astonishing. And as far as what they did to it, again, look at the pictures on Instagram. But only in Miami do you see cars like that. Only in Miami.
Do you realize that class was cars, young timer cars that were period modified? And so I didn't know this when we were looking at that Gambala. There was another Gambala 4 cars down. The Gullwing Mercedes was another Gambala. And the poor guy with the BMW Gambala had to call me later because he couldn't get his car started.
Yeah, but that Gambala Mercedes, the one that was right-hand drive.
Yeah.
Look, guys, go on Instagram. Go on. By the way, Instagram is the place to send us any suggestions for show topics and whatnot. And also, we wanted to, obviously, these two guys would be fantastic at helping you to appraise your car. So if you have a car that's weird or challenging to maybe come up with a value on, any advice whatsoever, do message us directly on Instagram. That would be great. All right. So now that we've been on the show for a while, let's get around to our actual topic, which is sports cars.
We have a topic, right?
We have a topic. Hey, we knew we were going to meander because all the things that happened in the past week. And I know if I were listening, I would have appreciated everything we just talked about. So let's talk about what we feel to be. Well, Greg, can you introduce the topic?
What is it? The most special sports car of all time?
The greatest. Well, greatest, not
greatest,
most special. Greatest sports car of all time. We could I tried to help us. Frankly I didn't come up with one. I'm gonna go last so I can, ride on your guys' wave.
Yeah.
But did you guys successfully come up with one?
Yes, and
Yes.
can I guess that Paul's is a Porsche? Can I guess that offhand?
Well,
No, I think we banned him.
I came up with three.
Okay,
Oh.
three's good.
Three, and I'll hit them all first really quick, and we can drill down whatever you want. Lamborghini Countach, Porsche 911, Corvette. And I'll asterisk by the Corvette because my wife listens to this. Literally, that car makes her dry heave. She hates Corvettes. And I'm not necessarily a huge fan. I'm not a huge hater. I'm indifferent. But I've always felt that Corvettes democratize the sports car ownership experience. They make cars that are competitive for kind of everyone. Everyone can afford a Corvette of one era or another. 911, who makes, I know Jeremy Clarkson loves to say that they haven't changed the car for 50, 60 years, but who makes a sports car that appeals to everyone, racing, competitive, everything for 60 years? And it's fundamentally the same car. But Lamborghini Countach, it's my first love. It's our logo, as you can see, for Auto Kennel, which is ironic because we've never sold a Lamborghini at all. I finally got to drive one last year for the first time, a Countach. But I think today's hypercar, supercar language since the early 70s all was sprung off of the Countach.
Well, now he picked three. I didn't know that was the rules.
Well, so you think of your other two, and I want to talk with Paul about something because I've really been trying my best not to be so sycophantic towards 911s. I've been trying my entire adult life, and I've really come to the conclusion that I am fighting a futile fight because the thing that makes a 911 so exceptional is a thing that other cars have never emulated. And again, forgive me, listeners, if you're sick of hearing 911 banter, but here are the facts. The engines, you can start out with essentially the flaw in the physics of the thing. There was originally, they did have a tendency to oversteer and the rest of it. But if you look at the combination of qualities and characteristics about a 911, there really are no other cars that are like that. There are mid-engine cars, but they're not rear-engine cars. I mean, you can find some, I suppose, the Corvair was rear engine. But if you think about the experience you have driving 911 with not a lot of weight over the front, it does allow for, especially when you're dealing with vintage cars, it does give you a unique driving experience. Once you learn how to drive a rear engine, and I think everyone's always learning, once you learn how to drive a rear engine car well, a 911 well, and it actually is faster on the track than mid-engine or certainly front-engine cars, if you know how to, if you know where to brake, because you have more traction coming out of the corners. And that makes driving spirited a hell of a lot more fun. The other thing it's really, again, I've tried my best to try to find something other than that I don't like about 911s, and I haven't. But the fact that they're so usable, you have actual honest to gosh, storage in the front. You have a back seat. You could put short humans in the back seat. And then the overall, even though the older ones, they're sort of antiquated in the way the pedals work, but you realize that the pedals are designed that way so you can heel and toe. The pedals are designed. If you look at the pedals on a 911, the gap, especially the vintage ones, especially the ones that have been set up correctly, you look to see the height of the pedal, the gas to the brake to the clutch. Look to see how the clutch is, where everything's positioned. And there's so many, you can talk about the history of it. You can talk about aesthetically how it looks, and they're gorgeous. All those things. But really, there's something truly special about a Porsche 911 from the driving experience. Looking at those gauges in front of you, again, going back to the vintage cars, you can't replicate it or replace it with any other car. Full stop.
I agree.
Yeah,
it's funny. We would joke on the rallies. I do all these vintage rallies, and it would just get annoying how many 911s. 40%, 50% of the field is 911. In fact, the Hill Country Rally that we're going to next week, there's over 300. It's only for 89 and older air-cooled Porsches with torsion bars. It's kind of anal, but it makes sense. Over 300 cars. There's a lot of different Porsches, a lot of 356s, 914s, and 911s. Over 50% of them are 911s. And here's the other thing, 40% of the 911s are from the 80s. And when we go in these rallies, we look around, we're like, damn it, there's half the field. You see an alpha and you're like, ooh. And in fact, some of the events where they give awards for like the coolest car, it's never a 911. We're just tired of seeing them. But then when you talk to people, and I've convinced some of my friends who are alpha guys, BMW guys, to finally buy a 911, and they are annoyed at how good they are, how
Totally.
great they are to drive. Like you said, Tim, how functional they are, how comfortable they are, and they are built so well. I mean, yes, they have little issues, but my 86 911 backdate has 365,000 miles. The motor's never been open. We finally did a leak down test, which I've been avoiding, and one cylinder's at like 17%, and the rest are 8 to 12. This is a 365,000 mile air cooled car. Yeah, it consumes a quart of oil every 800 miles, but oh well.
Right. I mean, so if you are curious, old 911 curious, you also have to accept the fact that it does not feel like a modern car. It definitely feels antiquated. But just again, the nature of the flat six motor, the nature of the sound that it makes, the responsiveness of the cable that's going directly to the throttle bodies, the whole thing is just, if you're into cars, if you've not yet experienced the vintage 911 and you're in Southern California, certainly definitely look up Paul. That's for damn sure. All right, Greg, did we give you enough time?
Oh yeah, I had it earlier, and unlike you guys, I think I'm a rule follower. I do what the teacher says. I only have one now.
GTO.
Since Paul, it's hard. Runner ups since Paul had three. I'll say Corvette C8 Z06 is one of the best cars I've ever driven. That thing is insane. 911s, I love 911s. You can't go wrong with the 911. But I wanted to pick one that is a great driver. It's iconic. I'm building it up here. It's iconic. It's rare. It's beautiful. It has a ton of heritage. It's a manual. It's a rear engined. Any guesses so far?
A
Rear
Fiat
engine?
500.
Oh yeah,
What's
an
that?
A-bar. An
An
A-bar.
A-bar.
No, of course I am talking about the 2005 Ford GT. That
Oh,
would
that's a
probably
great
be
car.
That's mid-engine. That's mid-engine.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad, mid-engine. So you got V8 in the back, incredible styling, incredible interior. You got to be careful where you park. You got to make sure you can get out.
They drive great. They really drive
Drive great. Now, I will say that I was just in a collection and they were doing their own oil change. And there's like 47, you got to take off the skid plates underneath and all that. There's like 47 little screws. And the little screws are only for the Ford GT and they're $35 a screw. So don't lose one of those screws.
Don't lose a screw, you'll be screwed.
But they're just such beautiful cars, and they truly look like the ones from the 60s. It's so iconic. I would probably want yellow, believe it or not. I'm not a yellow guy, but that's the rarest of the mass-produced colors. But you can't go wrong with any of them.
Yeah, that's good. Well, so greatest sports car of all time. Obviously, I'm going to go with the 911, but I'm going to give a very close runner-up and perhaps even more influential on convincing more people to be car enthusiasts. And I'm sorry for being so obvious, but a Mazda Miata. And a
Mm.
Mazda Miata, I don't remember how many they sold. One of you guys can fire up the Google and find out. But the Mazda Miata made it so that a whole new generation of folks starting in 1989 were exposed to what a pure sports car was supposed to be. And a lot of those people stayed, that was their entry, that was their gateway drug into maybe even other more expensive sports cars. But I'll say the older I've gotten, I hate saying that, but it's true. The older I've gotten, the less I am enthralled by expensive sports cars. So I think Paul will concur with us. A sports car, if it's something that's a bit of a museum piece or has to be, you have to worry about constantly, it sucks. It just does. Because it's no fun. Because you're not going to go out there and have fun with it. You're not going to, you're going to always be worried about values and all the rest of it. And I'm definitely guilty of that, probably more than anyone I know. But the essence of enjoying a sports car on the perfect road has to be with a car that you don't worry that when you get it back to your driveway, you've lost $10,000 in depreciation. I mean, that's just a big part of it, I think, personally. So if I had to choose one greatest sports car, and I'm not sure if all time would be the best way of saying it, because you could get back into the 30s and say, was that Bugatti beat 110, the first original supercar?
EV 110.
Yeah. You guys had one of those. You had a 130 at the auction, didn't you? I think you did.
I don't know
Yeah.
what a 130 is. Okay.
Any event, well, maybe I said it wrong. I'm not a Bugatti guy, but in any event, so yeah, that would be my answer. It's probably an early Miata. Do you guys? So, would any of you guys did
There's a
anybody
million,
say anything?
a million.
Go
There's a
ahead.
million, over a million Miatas produced, and I think that's a good choice, Tim, because you hear people all the time say, the answer is always Miata. Um,
Yeah.
and ironically, I don't think I've ever driven a Miata. I don't know if I would fit, but
They
You
built over
will.
a million of them by 2016.
yeah.
You know the thing, Paul, your experience, here's what you'll experience when you drive it. The steering is amazing. The pedal feel is amazing. The feedback through the steering wheel is amazing. But what you'll really be intrigued by is the manual transmission. The manual transmission in those cars, for a car that does not cost $1 billion, is ridiculously good. And
Well,
so you should drive one.
no, I remember I've driven a few Honda S2000s, and I remember the thing that stuck out the most to me on that was the shifting. Just that direct shifting, and I'm wondering if that's similar to Miata.
I'm going to bring up something here. It's not on our script, but our outline. But I'm going to bring this up just because I know I brought this up a couple podcasts ago, and you guys didn't bite. That I talked about with Greg at the auction, and he wanted to talk more about it.
I did. Okay.
Greg, you did. Greg
Okay.
mentioned the C8 Z06. I don't understand, and I don't understand how the new ZR1, let alone the ZR1 that's supposedly going to have the Zora package, with that's going to be all-wheel drive. I don't understand what that's going to do to the supercar hypercar hierarchy, because the new ZR1 is blowing the doors off these cars that are supposed to be the best, most badass McLaren, Senna, and all these others. It's kicking their butts for less than 200 grand at some of the craziest ass road courses. And they're being driven by engineers, not by race car drivers. So what's fascinating is a whole bunch of things, but really the old school, and all the forums, I'm listening to these people trying to, defend their, 911 GT3 RSs and the rest of it. And they're saying, well, Corvette's only made for a straight line. Yeah, but it's beating this is GT3 RS on road courses. And it's beating, these crazy, supposed to be the best of the best cars, not in straight lines, but on the roads that these European cars are supposed to be able to dominate. Do you guys have any, what is that going to do? Are people just going to say, it's a Corvette? Or is this actually completely, Paul's going with, it's a Corvette because his wife's going to barf on one. But I mean, what do you think, Greg? We'll ignore Paul because he just wants to talk about 911s.
Let's let Paul talk first.
No,
Okay.
I think going back to what I said about Corvettes, why I think they're one of the more important sports cars ever is they've democratized performance. They sacrifice some of the build quality of some of the other items, the other competitor products, but when you look at the C7 and the Halo cars of the C7 and C6 and keep going back, even if you go back to, what was it, the C3 with the L88, I mean, that was a phenomenal car for the day compared to everything else. But at the end of the day, I think there's a bit of a stigma of who the Corvette owner is. And maybe it's a status thing, maybe not. I don't know. It never really mattered to me. But I think that the new the new Halo car for the the C8 is going to be great. And it's going to do what the other ones have done.
Well, so if I'm selling a product, I'm selling a really expensive freaking car, right? And one of my USPs, unique selling propositions, is that it's, really fast and does 230 miles per hour and it can beat every car on the track. This is my thing. And I'm going to get you to write me a check for $1 million, $2 million, $3 million for that. And then all of a sudden a car, being pumped out of Kentucky kicks that supercar's ass. Are you saying that people just won't care because they're just going to buy it? They're buying the other thing just because the brand appeal and it's a Corvette. They won't.
I
They're setting.
definitely, because think about it, even though like someone goes buys a McLaren Senna, no, the people buying these cars aren't using anywhere near the performance envelopes beyond what their Cayenne does. They're buying just a lot more than just the performance figures. The
Let me give you
name.
let me give you a counter to that. McLaren had no brand in the United States up until they started selling. What year was that? I don't remember. 2014 or something. When did they?
I like
Okay,
the
so
five,
nobody knew.
7 years.
Yeah, no, it was the one before that. I don't remember. But anyway, yeah. So McLaren had no brand, and so we're seeing McLaren come out of the nowhere in Europe. Obviously, they know what it was, but here nobody did. And now McLaren is now seen as one of the top three sports cars, at least in the United States. But I want to go all the way back because I think you're potentially, respectfully with love, Paul, wrong about the market just essentially proceeding as it always has with its preconceived notions about Corvette owners and the rest of it. Look at the Lexus from 1989 and 1990. And you guys are both old enough to remember. Do you remember how disruptive that car was to the luxury car? I mean, you remember it was ridiculous. And those
Right.
cars were exceptional cars. You still see those things running around, and it's a great car. But the point of it is that people abandon their luxury brands. People abandon their buying their 15th Mercedes in a row, and they bought a Lexus. And I wonder, because the C8 really has bridged the gap on performance. It eclipsed its benchmarks by a country mile,
Well,
and build quality too. I think it's really closed the gap too.
but here's a thing. Going back to your example, you're talking about a utility item, a four-door sedan, the Lexus LS 400 compared to the Mercedes S Class. It is generally a less emotional product. But when Lexus built the supercar, the V10 LFA, which is a phenomenal car, and in all rights outperformed and did everything in its category and its segment, it's not till today that they've become valuable. They couldn't sell them. No one cared because no one wanted their supercar to be a Lexus. That's the car that they used to, valet park somewhere and just, go to dinner in and go on a road trip. So I think it's different when you're talking about a sedan versus something that's an emotional, complete discretionary income purchase.
Well, then, I mean, the McLaren thing would be a better argument for how it's
Well,
actually. It's possible that the market will welcome this
Well,
ZR1 with open
no,
arms.
it's going to welcome it. I just like I remember distinctly when the McLaren came on the scene because the people that were buying them were all my Porsche clients who loved track days and loved canyon driving, and the McLaren was a compromise, but it did those activities better, and it didn't really matter if you beat the crap out of it on the track. I had so many clients buying those 3-year-old McLarens when they first came out, when they were a few years old, and they were getting them for 150 grand, and they were just dominating track days, compared to someone's new GT3 RS. So I think those had the appeal there. But in the end, my clients who bought those, they just did was they stopped taking their Porsche to the track and used that as more of a weekend car, and the McLaren did the track duty. And then they found out it didn't hold up as well, mechanically and construction wise.
So let's just say middle-aged folks like us are not going to be the deciders of this. I think it's going to be Instagram generation. And if the Instagrammers out there, which by the way, oh my gosh, were there a lot of Instagrammers and, guys that were like teenagers that were wearing media passes at Moto Miami, influencer types. But I think they're the ones that are ultimately going to decide whether the Corvette, the new C8s transcend the sort of, I think the quagmire of the gold chain, hairy chested guy that's, been the Corvette's, legacy forever. Paul or Greg, do you have an opinion on all of this?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Paul. I mean, I think there's not a lot of brand jumping. I think there's beginning though, because I think the C8 is such a special car in a base model. I think the Z06, you got some more bleed over. I think the ZR1, whatever they're going to call it, is going to blow people's minds. I don't know that people are just so brand loyal. I think there is a slice. You mentioned the flex factor. I think there's a slice of it where they're going to fall out on some of these cars because depreciation. I don't know that they would go to the Corvette. I mean, you're not really, and like in Miami, you're not necessarily flexing with the Corvette. You are with some of the great. I mean, there were 13 Paganis there, which I've never seen before in my life. I just had to call it out. I don't know if you saw it, but there was one, the only single orange Carrera GT ever built came rolling through. I'm like, oh, that thing's cool.
Well, but
Anyway,
you're talking about multi-million-dollar cars. Julie and I, we
yeah.
were in Pagani last August. And by the way, if you have a place to go in Italy, I love Ferrari and whatnot, but go to freaking Pagani if you can only choose one, because that's the experience that you hope your hypercar, shop foundry will be like, because it's just so beautiful and so intimate. But those cars are $3 and $4 million.
Yeah, but it's funny if you Google Ferrari 296 depreciation, there's so much out there right now. And so not that they're in the same price point, but they're getting a lot closer, because I don't know what the Corvette's going to be, but I know it's going to have $50,000-$100,000 markup, at least for the initial ones. So I don't know. I don't think you'll have a lot going over to it. But that's slowly changing for sure, just because the performance is so sick.
It is fascinating. Yeah, definitely. Can I ask you guys one more question, or do you guys have to go?
No, no, I'm good.
Go ahead.
All right. So here's the other thing that I really have been studying, just for the sake of this podcast. And we talked about this on the show before, but I didn't realize how much I was underestimating this particular category. Freaking 911 resto mods. I know everyone knows about Singer, and they're the benchmark. But at Moda Miami, there was a company called Lightspeed, which I'd never heard of before. They had a really beautiful green car in the green metallic, which is sitting in the parking lot, which looked great. And then I Googled Lightspeed, and then I started, through the put Chat GPT to work. And there are like 20 or 30 companies that are making Singer-esque, they look the same basically, of these, modified 964s. And I guess when I was walking around Moda and I was seeing the modified cars from the 80s when I was with Greg, by the way, Paul, Greg didn't tell you, but his assigned section were all these gussied up, 1980s cars. And just to that 325 guy's credit, in the back seat, and we put pictures and videos on Instagram, the guy had a attaché case full of fake money and also a thing with a cigar in it. I mean, you could almost see the bags of cocaine. I mean, it was so perfect as far as like how he staged the whole thing. But I wonder ultimately what's going to happen. What's the future of these cars? What's the future of who's going to spend $1 million or $750,000 on one of these resto mods? So when I was walking around, I was looking at all these beautiful cars. There's some Singers there. There's these, just ridiculous things. And then I stumbled across that 993 GT2 sitting in front of the hotel in all white. I put tons of pictures on Instagram, and I thought to myself, and I know those things are around million two. Who, in my mind, I couldn't see why you would buy. And you're going to say, well, the guy who buys the Singer already has 10 of those. Like, I don't think that's true. People just like to say that to be trite. But who's going to, in the future, want to buy somebody else's vision of what their, what they thought the ultimate 911 would be with all their specific colors and the rest of it, when they can go and buy a 993 GT2, for example. So it took me a long time to get to it, but I don't understand that market.
Well, I mean, I think that market's finite. I mean, there's what, 50 GT2s made, or I mean, it's such a slow number, and it's weird. You're going to buy one that, if you have that kind of money, you're going to buy the best one possible that's available. So I think if Porsche made a lot more of them, whereas, Singer or any of these other resto mod companies out there, or even, what I consider the premier, which is Roof, which is its own manufacturer, you can just, it's money and waiting, but you can go get one. There's no hoping one comes for sale.
So when I had a time with Mr. Lieberman, I asked, he wanted to look at the Gunther Works, right? So that's another one. And we looked at it, and I asked him, I'm like, all right, and I'll ask the same question of you two guys. If you had $1 million, would you buy a Singer, Gunther Works, or Roof?
Roof, hands down.
100%. 100%. I don't even think that's a good question about a Roof. And it's the one that's celebrated the least, because Roof does they do, God bless them. They're just not all over Instagram and essentially appealing to that particular market, because they probably have customer wait lists that go back years, right? Or go to the future years. But Roof, 100%.
Yep.
So why, this could be a whole nother podcast here, but Singer became such an incredible tidal wave. I think they started like $300,000 or something. And now they have like 800 employees, and they're building these incredible cars. Maybe we should save this. Let's save this for another podcast.
No.
Like,
what are you going to say? He's worried about being controversial.
Why hasn't that happened with Roof? Because I love Roofs as well. And I think Gunther Works are pretty wicked as well. I mean, no door, no windows, no lot of,
I mean, you could throw Roof in there with like Tuttle. Tuttle has a different vision, but kind of going along the same way. I think for them, and going back to what Tim said, is they curate a specific customer, and that customer aligns with their production capabilities. And don't forget, a Roof, a Singer, and a Tuttle, they're all about the same price. They're 7-figure cars. Yep. And I going what Tim said, I would say Roof is the more complete manufacturer. I mean, they are actually, there is the new CTR Yellowbird at our property right now. And I've spent a lot of time just crawling, haven't driven it yet, but just crawling over it. I mean, that car looks like a 911. It doesn't share one part. It's a different shape. It's a different size. But when you look at it, you're like, holy crap, every detail of that car is exquisitely manufactured, not for show, but for function. And a Tuttle is the same idea, except it leans into the vintage. And Singer is, to me, a hot dress and not a lot of, sorry, I think they're beautiful cars. And I know Rob Dickinson, but I just don't, they never appealed to me except for the new turbo. I'm very curious about the new turbo study because I like where the direction is with that. And the rest of them are just copycats, in my opinion.
Well, they are for sure, and they must have gotten hold of Singer, some of these guys, and just 3D scanned them because I know Rob must have put just Rob used to be a designer with Lotus. I'm sure you guys know that, but he put in his original Singer Classic was really really beautiful, arguably whether it was more beautiful than say for example an early 70s 911 RSR. I mean you can decide that for yourself, but they all copied him, and I cannot imagine he wasn't like. You imagine being Rob after having put all that work, blood, sweat, and tears into the designing of that car, and then just essentially see all these guys ripping off your IP. I mean, it's not really IP, but you get the gist of it. That's heartbreaking, I think. But yes, over the test of time, if you're asking, I think the question is, if you're going to spend over 7 figures on a Resto Mod 911, and it's 10 years from now and you care about values, it's going to be roof, I think, personally. And I do honestly, I wonder what the future values of those things are going to be because there's some really very specific, that's a nice way of saying the, specked out Singers out there with these colors. I love them all. I like them all. More garish. I think it's more interesting, but that's not how everyone thinks. And so maybe the business in the future is Singer basically re-singerizing a Singer, and repersonalizing it. I don't really even know. But I find that market very interesting. And Paul, you said it's a finite market, and that's true. But altogether, these guys are churning out all these manufacturers, and we haven't even talked about all the other ones, but just old, classic 911 Resto Mods. They're making thousands of cars in total production. All these companies, at least I would assume they were. Now I'm going to bring up something controversial, and Greg doesn't have to participate in this. So
Before you do that, could I ask you one question?
Yeah.
So which came first, Singer or Icon? Because I think Icon really took that idea of
Icon came first.
Yeah. Icon. I mean, I remember seeing him at Monterey remember when the new Jeep came out and they hadn't come out with a 4-door yet, and Icon came out with a 4-door. I remember walking at the Monterey auctions, this early 2000s, 2001 or 2, and I remember seeing some of the Icons. And I knew Jonathan Ward, and I think he was doing that even before I saw it. And just really quick, I was sitting at the pool in Palm Springs at our group event with Rob Dickinson when this is 2004 or 5, when he tells me the idea of the Singer product, or 2006. And I was building hot rods at the time, and I was like, he described to me, I'm like, who the hell's going to buy that? And how much you going to have to charge? He's like, oh, it's going to be 150 grand. And you got to remember at that time, a real 73 RS Touring was less than 150 grand.
Wow.
Yeah. That's crazy.
I'm done.
All right. So I'm going to tell you guys a story, and I heard this 3 different times. I'm just going to say it straight up. There is a phenomenon. This has always been happening. I think Paul's going to have a lot to contribute to this one in particular, where there are restoration and resto rod shops that are essentially running what could be best described as Ponzi schemes on deposits. And I've heard stories about people who have been on wait lists for their cars for multiple years. And then again, the media pass gets me. People are telling me all their deep, dark secrets. Wear a media pass. It's really kind of funny, the different experience you have versus just being an attendee. But I was hearing people tell about their fear that they're caught in some sort of Ponzi scheme with regards to deposits on cars, meaning, for example, that you are going to build a car. It's going to be a 3-year wait or 2-year wait or whatever. So you put down your deposit, and typically the way it works, let's say it's a $500,000 car, you're going to put down $100,000, and then they're going to call you out of the blue and say the car is at this stage of production. Put down another 100,000, and then before you deliver it, you're going to have to pay the balance off. Well, what a lot of these companies have done, and I think, I hope this isn't true, but hearing something once, it's like that's a nice story. Hearing something 3 times, and when there's smoke, there's fire. So what I think happened to a lot of these companies is they committed to making too many cars, and they underestimated the nasty effect of inflation. So the cost of their materials went through the roof, the cost of labor went through the roof, and all the rest of it. And I think a lot of these guys on these restoration places are unfortunately, unless they get more deposits, more new players to step up to the board game, a lot of these guys are going to, a lot of customers are going to end up with no cars. And some of the ones that are, some of the bigger names, I think are not immune. The bigger name resto shops and, resto rod companies are not immune to what I just described. It's an easy mistake to make if you're successful selling some sort of or having a restoration shop. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I wonder if right now, because of rising interest rates, people backing out on cars, and people are saying, well, people don't finance their $1 million cars. They don't directly finance them, but they finance them off loans from their, commercial real estate. They finance them off loans from collateral loans from their securities. They'll call up JP Morgan and say, I want 750 grand, and they get a low interest rate. That's how a lot of these transactions happen, because somebody with $1 million to buy a car is going to leave the $1 million in the S&P 500 and make 100,000, 120,000 off that per year, using the last 20 years as an example. And they're going to borrow against that, no taxes, no capital gains, and that's what they're going to buy their fancy car with. And I'm curious, and I wonder if all these things are compounding to create what will be an unfortunate outcome for a lot of people waiting for their cars to be delivered. Do you guys have any opinions on that? Or have you heard anything similar?
Hey, Paul, mine's going to be shorter, so let me give my 2 cents.
Oh, mine will be short, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think it happens. It's been happening for 60 years. It'll continue to happen. Maybe it's compounded now. I don't know. But that's why, like, the top echelon restoration shops, they do get the really good rates, and they do have a 3-year wait because they have built that trust over so many years. Now, to your point, yes, there could always be a weird thing that happens where things go sideways, and one of the big ones. One of my favorite magazines is Sports Car Market. John Dranius, he's been on the podcast before. He just had an article that walked through the whole thing about one that shut down, went to litigation, all that kind of stuff. So for a future episode, I will have a real world example that we can kind of go through the nuts and bolts of it.
Yep. Well, there's no real way to protect yourself from that. I was thinking about, what would you do? Put your deposits in an escrow account? The builder needs the money to freaking do the work and buy the parts. So you really are, if that's what's kind of scary, I think. Yeah. Paul?
I mean, I've seen this happen not on so many different levels with small shops that have promised something, and people ask me about doing it. And I just said, it's a risk. You're going to have to be a project manager and be very involved so that you can pull the plug at any time you think it's going south. But most of these buyers, they have this illusion that they're just going to write a check and, write checks periodically. And then one day it shows up on their doorstep, and they don't find out till far too late that that's not the reality, that they're going to lose the money. And I think some of it, kind of like the Tucker story, was with good intentions. Some of it with, maybe intentional, fraud in mind. I mean, I think you see all different versions of it. And going back to what Greg said, it's been happening. Tucker's was in the late 40s, early 50s. It's been happening for 60 years, and it will continue to happen. And that's why the premier shops have done well, because I think they, managed the business in a way that protected the person who's buying the car from getting screwed. And I think buyers will pay a premium. Gunther works in our backyard. I have clients who get Gunther, they have a finite number of deposits they're going to take, finite number of cars. They don't get greedy. And then they also are a very well-funded business. So when someone asks me, like, what do I do with this potential business? I'm like, you have to go do some homework and find out how viable that business is. How are they backed financially? Are they going to be around in 3 years? Are you going to want the car in 3 years?
Yeah, that's the big one. Well, you said two things really important. First of all, you said a lot of important things, but one in particular, you're going to have to PM. You're going to have to project manage it. And a lot of people don't have the aptitude for that, frankly. They don't have the patience for it. But I know, Paul, you and I were doing restorations at the same time of early 9/11s. And Julie and I were up there checking on everything in LA every single freaking weekend, making sure everything, before we gave any additional money. You're constantly monitoring and watching. You have to. And these were with branded guys too. But I'll say there needs to be somebody that comes out with a financial system to make it so the likelihood, so for example, if you invest money in private equity, like a hedge fund, There are third parties that handle the money and make sure nothing's absconded with. Making sure the guy who put the fund together is not, spending it all on, blue in Las Vegas over the weekend kind of thing. And so there should be an intermediary that enters in that will essentially act as your representative when the builder or the restoration place needs to draw down some of the money in the deposit. They have to provide accounting for it, and there has to be some level of documentation. That's a business I'm not going to get into, but somebody needs to get into that, because I do believe that there are going to be some people that are going to be caught, with their pants down with regards to essentially what's happening to all their money. And it's not a, cheerful topic, but it is something that everyone needs to be aware of, I think. Definitely.
Yep.
Right. So guys, next podcast, I want to talk about the most overrated cars. The most overrated cars that
944 turbo.
the most overrated sports cars. And then listeners, here's what matters. We want to continue doing this podcast at the level we've been doing it. We can talk forever about all kinds of different things. I had literally a page of other things I wanted to bring up to these guys, but all of us have to get back to life. But if you have any topics, if you have any suggestions, if you have any questions, post them over on Instagram. And we would love to expand in talking about, I mentioned before, appraisals. If you have a weird car that you're thinking about putting for sale, or if you have a question about maybe really what the maintenance is like on an old 911, or, all those things, whatever your topic, whatever is on your mind, whatever you're really curious about, let us know. And we haven't even talked about car care and detailing, which is something I love. I used to have a detail shop. We haven't talked about really what goes into the restoration of, for example, we could have Harvey Wildman. Did I say it right?
Harvey Weidman.
Sorry. And have him talk about really what goes into restoring a vintage set of Fuchs wheels, which would be, hilarious. Things like that. So whatever your topics are, you guys, please do let us know. It is our pleasure to do this show for you. We truly, truly do love it. And make sure if you're at any of the shows that we're at, come up and say hi. Let's have some pictures. Let's have some conversations. Give us some feedback. And because we're having a lot of fun, hopefully you guys are as well. Anything else you guys would like to say to everyone before we wrap for today?
Yeah. No, repeat what you said. Send questions to us. Fun stuff. Challenge us.
Yeah, challenge us.
There you go.
All right, great. You guys have a fantastic week. Thank you.